Hey folks, Wilfie here. I wanted to record and post a little rant about something a bit different today. I know that it's fairly common practice now to crap on the media and complain about just how terrible they are at actually covering any kind of topic. They're not objective in the slightest. They're biased as hell. They're propaganda spewers. They essentially work for a political party or um, a corporate interest or whatever. Um, and it became pretty obvious, of course, in the orange days, 2016 and onward. But it that was not the start of it. They've been terrible for centuries. But I came across this piece on just flipping through a bunch of true crime crap because that's becoming one of my recent vices, I guess. Uh, it was a piece that was done in 2015 by 60 Minutes Australia. And holy crap, was it bad. And the frustrating part is they utterly wasted an amazing opportunity to sit down with and essentially interrogate one of the nastiest criminals on earth. Guy's name was Peter Scully. He was a kitty diddler. He ran a child porn ring and like sex trafficking, and he did a I don't even want to mention the name of the video series that he did, but the this piece, of course, made a big deal of it. So I guess I can't really uh, don't look this up because it'll put you on a watch list. But the name of the series that he did, or one of them, was Daisy's Destruction, I think. And it is. I haven't, of course, seen it because that's not something I'd ever want to see. But it's apparently some of the most brutal child abuse ever shown on camera. I mean, the guy was depraved and messed up, and they had a real chance to sit down with the guy and ask him questions, and he seemed willing to talk. He, at first, was answering questions honestly and truthfully, and it all went south because they sent the most incompetent person they had. And that's saying something because I don't think there are any competent journalists left. So it was a two-parter on YouTube, at least. I don't know how they presented the original piece, but it was about 20 minutes worth of 20 minutes of my life I'll never get back. And they also did a 10-minute follow up where they can't help but huff their own farts, so they had an interview the interviewer piece where they took the presenter who presented the piece and interviewed the guy, and they asked her all sorts of questions about her experience. So to get into the kind of meat and potatoes of this, journalism, hi Calypso, journalism is supposed to be about digging through the muck and finding the truth, at least trying. And obviously you're not always going to get there. You're often not going to get there, but the goal is to find out what you can and report it without distorting it, without lying, without fabricating, without leaving out important details. Nobody does that anymore. And this was some of the worst tabloid caliber uh, infotainment I think I've seen in a long damn time. And this happened before the media completely lost its mind over Orange Man Bad winning the election in 2016. Um, so let me get into the specifics of what really cheesed me off about this piece because, you know, just babbling right now and I'm sure it's boring. So this was, like I said, it was aired by, produced by 60 Minutes Australia. The the piece itself covered, of course, Peter Scully, and he was the subject of the interview. They interviewed a couple other people too, and I'll get to that. And then it was combination of interview, voiceover. They had footage from when the local police arrested the guy, and oof, they also interviewed one of his victims, which did not go as well as it should have. And they interviewed two of his accomplices. And that's one of the things that really pissed me off in how it's the same woman who did these interviews, all of them. And it really pissed me off how she handled them differently than she handled him. And again, I'll get to it. So, the dumb broad that they had to present the piece and conduct the interviews, her name is Tara Brown. And I'm sure you can just look up 60 Minutes Australia and her name, and you'll find no end of arrogant, smug presentations of topics that she knows nothing about and cares even less about. The first thing that this piece did that really offended me, though, was that it showed at least one of the victims, I think maybe even two, without blurring them. It might have been the girl that was killed, but I feel like they showed another victim as well, and they ID'd them. So all the complaining that the press does these days about people getting doxxed, they've got no problem doing that when it's good for ratings. So even for the girl who died, that piece could not have given much comfort to her family. And they made no effort to hide her. So of course this all happened in the Philippines. So in a fairly small town, a really small town, kind of out of the way. So word traveled fast about this. But yeah, so that was hot garbage. So they picked this idiot old bag to conduct the interviews and and present the piece. Now I watched the video where they interviewed her first, and I'm kind of glad I did because it shed some light on how the actual feature was going to go, and it really put some things into perspective. The first thing that really uh, stood out to me was how proud she was of the fact that she deliberately refused to watch any of the material that the prosecutors who were cooperating with the producers uh, of the crime. She didn't want to see any of the evidence, photo or audio or video. Her reasoning was once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. And technically, yes, that's true. You're in the wrong line of work if the prospect of seeing something that makes you uncomfortable is something that makes you not do research on a piece you're working on. You know what you're getting into when you take on an investigative piece about a child abuser. It's not like they're just gonna like police are just gonna show you videos of kittens jumping on meadows and playing with bunny rabbits. It's you know what to expect when you volunteer for something like that. But nope, she didn't want anything to do with it. It was beneath her, and you could tell there was a major air of superiority and smugness about this woman, especially when she bragged about that. She even said that people were welcome to consider her a poor reporter because of that. No problem. I do. Um, she also did absolutely no investigative work of her own. The producers, and other people involved in the production, they did the legwork. The only thing she did was show up in person to go on tours with the authorities of all the different houses where the abuse happened. And again, I'll get to that later. And then, of course, she went to the jail to interview the scumbag himself, and another prison to interview his accomplices, who were women. But she didn't do any digging. She made it clear that she didn't read up too much about the case, and she refused to watch any video evidence, of course, or look at photos. And it was just so bad. The whole piece was billed as this rare look into a rare glimpse into the mind of a monster. But when she actually sat down with him to ask him questions, um, well, she was arrogant and smug throughout. Had a stupid, just smug grin on her face that she couldn't get rid of and made no effort to. She asked him the dumbest, trash, tabloid tier questions that you could ever possibly ask of someone like this. Um, she insulted him to his face, argued with him, wouldn't accept practically any answer he gave her, and substituted her own. Even when he told her she was wrong, she kept doing it. And continued every time he would answer and she didn't like his answer, she would just start making up her own shit and turn it back around and start attacking him again. And for obvious reasons, he shut down pretty quickly, and it was a really terrible, lousy interview. And I just facepalmed when I saw the final product. Again, part of this was featured in the kind of behind the scenes interviewing the interviewer thing. They showed a couple snippets of the interview, and it was abysmal. And even talking about the piece later to another 60 Minutes producer or whatever, she said, "Oh, he was so arrogant and smug." And having watched the piece, I'm like, no, he was just withdrawing from somebody who was just being an asshole and not really interested in him. And she wasn't. She was there to preach. She was there to be a kind of a school marm to him and yell at him and scold him and gloat, essentially. She just wanted to, I don't know. She wasn't there to be a reporter. That's for damn sure. So, to give some concrete examples, one of the questions she asked him, when well, I'm not gonna say she tried. These were all planned, I'm sure. They were such basic cookie cutter questions. They were great starters, but her follow up was non-existent, and it was just trash. I took notes, so that's why I'm looking down here a bit. If you wonder why I'm not always gazing at the camera, what was the first one? When you were on the run, how strong was the urge to find a girl? And he said there wasn't really an urge. It was something else. But she wasn't interested in exploring that idea with him. She just went on the attack and said, "Well, what do you mean? You what? You just suddenly weren't a pedophile anymore when you fled?" And just argued with him. Then she asked, of course, the towards the end, because I think she knew that she had no rapport with the guy, so she was kind of losing him from the beginning. But I think she knew at the end that this she was only going to get a couple more questions. And she asked him, "What is it about you that makes you hate children and women so much?" Like, wow, that's not a loaded question, is it? And make no mistake, I am not sympathizing or with or defending this creep because he absolutely deserves to be where he is. And I'm certainly not trying to stand up for anything for him. I'm criticizing her and her producers because of the way they did this. They completely bungled it. Why would you ask somebody a question like that? Um, and you know they sent a woman on purpose. They wanted him to sit there and have to play nice with a woman who obviously hated his guts and wanted to sit there and argue with him. Um, and he, she really botched it. They could have even made that dramatic. Like, there's a good way to do yellow journalism, and this wasn't even that. Like tabloid trash kind of journalism, I guess. Jerry Springer was a master of that stuff. Um, who else was really good at it? God, so many of the news agencies and people of like the 70s and 80s, they were much better at this than they are now. Anyway, but yeah, they botched that and couldn't even do this right. Um, she asked if he had abused his own children, and he scoffed at that and said, "No, of course not." And again, instead of a reasonable follow up to that, a great follow up to that question would be something like, "Well, why were your children off limits if these other children weren't? Now, the answer to that's obvious because they're my kids, but you can at least get somewhere with that kind of question. Her response was no such thing, though. When he scoffed and said, "Of course not," she said, "What, are you shocked?" Like she was just there to try to get a rise out of him. And I don't know. I'm very pleased that she didn't get that from him. Another question that she asked him, and this kind of illustrates best this whole exchange of why she was such a terrible interviewer. Why did you rape kids? That's a good question. That was one of the few good questions she asked him. And he said, that actually seemed to kind of make him stop and think. And he goes, I really don't know. And without skipping a beat, "Well, why don't we hazard a guess?" she said. And he replied, "No, let's not hazard a guess." And again, she just jumps right in. "Is it because you're depraved? Are you a pervert?" Again, just what kind of question is that? No shit, he's depraved. He's in prison for raping kids. And again, she just, flies off the handle, starts arguing with him, and uh, that stupidity just didn't stop. And he eventually got sick of her shit. And towards the end of the interview, he said, well, he first mentioned early on, because she asked, uh, does he feel. No, no, sorry. That was the last question she asked him that finally pissed him off. But early on, he intimated to her that he's been writing a journal. And presumably, he's going to try to publish a book. And I really don't know who wants to read that kind of shit, but whatever. Got to keep yourself busy in prison, I guess. Towards the end of the interview, he flat out told her, I think from here on out, my answer is just going to be, that's going to be in the journal. You can ask me whatever questions you want, but I'm done. Are we done? Can I go? And she just sternly, like a fucking school teacher, "I'm not done with you." Okay. Then at the very end of that, he finally, I mean, she asked him, the last question that he decided just to shut it down. Um, she asked if he felt any remorse and for what he did, and he said, "Well, of course I do." And she was kind of taken aback by that answer and surprised, and so she kept prying. "Well, why? When did you start feeling remorse? Was it during while you were doing these things to these girls, or was it when you got caught? Do you only feel remorse because you were caught?" And she just couldn't ask a follow-up question without insulting and attacking the guy. And naturally, his response was, "We're done here. I'm not talking to you anymore." And she finally, I think, realized finally that she had goofed. And the funny thing is, at the very end, when he said, "We're done here," she had to have the last word. And she looked up at the guard and said, "We're done here." And then said, "Oh, he can stand up." And she looked at him and barked a command at him as if she was in charge. "Stand up." And, he kind of just chuckled and stood up and then went back to his cell. And she got practically nothing out of that interview. It was ridiculously bad. And she was proud of herself over it. She's absolutely convinced she did a stellar job. Now, here's where it gets really bad. Intermixed with all of this, because they have an attention span of a flea, so they can't focus on any single thing for more than about 5 or 10 seconds. So they did this obnoxious thing throughout these 20 minutes of cutting back and forth. The narrative shifted so many times. They, of course, broke the interview up into probably 7 or 8 different segments, which is really frustrating because she didn't get that many good answers out of him. You really could have shown that whole interview in about 5 minutes, and I actually kind of think I get the feeling that interview didn't last more than about 5 or 10 minutes. because she completely failed to build any kind of rapport with him to get him to answer questions. So I'm sure that ended really fast. But they had to stretch that shit out as far as they could over 20 minutes. So they interspliced it or intermingled it with a bunch of other threads. And she did two other interviews. Well, she did a bunch of others, but the two that really stand out, sorry, make that three that really stood out. She interviewed one of the surviving victims of this guy's abuse. Now, ostensibly, she was there to interview this guy, I'm sure in her mind, to scold him, punish him, humiliate him, be angry at him, and be a strong, tough, motherly figure to defending the rights of all children everywhere. You know, she felt like a hero, uh, putting on a performative piece when she was talking to him, and he's probably smart enough to realize that's what she was doing, which is why he didn't give her much. But then, ostensibly, that's because she cares about the children. But of course, I'm complaining about this topic, so we all know what happened. She interviewed one of his victims, one of the survivors, and she didn't just lob softball questions at an obvious, like, 8 or 9 year old child. She asked her about some very specific things. And I mean, she got into gory detail. They didn't show all of it, but you could tell. I mean, the questions that they did show her asking. After he was done abusing you, after he was done hurting you, where did he make you sleep? Why the hell are you making a poor kid relive that kind of shit? What's wrong with you? Literally asking a prepubescent kid to relive probably the most horrific abuse of her life. And that wasn't the only detailed question she asked. She asked such questions as, how many days did he make you dig your own grave before he let you stop? Like, you know, didn't these kids go through enough? Didn't they have to tell the police all of this stuff? Couldn't you have found this kind of information in the notes that they tried to give you that you refused to read? Oh, right, yeah. It's not as sensational, and it would have been work. So, yeah. Of course, the kid starts crying at the end of the interview, and she very graciously decides, okay, I hope you heal. And she has the balls to touch him gently, or her, sorry, touch her gently on the shoulder. Really? You just made a kid relive a brutal sexual assault over the span of weeks and being forced to dig her own grave, sleep in a corner, and all sorts of abusive shit on camera. And now you're all matronly and you're going to reach over. Oh, it's okay. You'll be okay. You ever want to just punch somebody through the screen? Anyway, and that's not the worst of it. Believe it or not, this gets worse. The other two interviews that they gave a lot of time to, especially the one, she actually managed to interview two of the guy's accomplices. They were both women. Now, the one that they spent the most time on was a woman who was herself a victim of sex trafficking, not at the hands of this guy. She was a victim from the past, from other stuff. Some other pile of jerks were abusing her. Um, and she kind of fell in with this guy. He convinced her that, he could keep her safe and take care of her and all this crap. And it wasn't long before he talked her into helping him with this trafficking and abuse thing. Here's what she did. Uh, she literally brought child victims to his home by finding poor kids and promising them food. Took them, lured them to his house, and then helped him tie them up and restrain them, and then left them, knowing what he was about to do. She also helped later on, she also started appearing in the videos that he shot. And she was conducting some of the abuse, like sodomizing these kids and hitting them, saying nasty things to them, like verbally abusing them, slapping them, beating them. She did these things. Now she's on trial now for, of course, a life sentence is what she's facing, and there's no doubt they'll give it to her. The Philippines are pretty damn strict about this stuff. I would not want to piss off the authorities in the Philippines. They do not screw around. But anyway, now she interviews this woman. Now this woman is arguably as bad as the guy is because she helped supply him with victims, and then she abused those victims herself and let him record her doing it. But good old Tara, the interviewer, same woman that was really rude and viciously unpleasant towards Scully, she interviewed this woman, and she was very friendly and soft and matronly. She established rapport. She was never firm or rude. She did not get aggressive and never challenged her interviewee. She was patient. She was always listened to her responses. She didn't ask insulting or abusive questions, didn't insult her in the slightest. And there were a few times where she seemed to actually be sympathetic towards a woman who had abused, beaten, raped, and supplied kids to a guy that she, was lambasting for being a brutal rapist and pedophile. But she was sweet as can be to this evil woman. Um, and she even asked her questions about the specific bits of abuse that she carried out herself against these kids or that she was aware of the guy doing. Now, she didn't even get that far with him because he ended the interview because she was being stupid. But she didn't display any kind of anger or outrage, even as she described this stuff to the woman that did it to try to get her reaction out of her. Um, and then the most striking thing was, as much performative rage as she put on display interviewing him, the woman that she was interviewing, the accomplice, apparently didn't know this little detail. And so when the interviewer asked her about this and she broke down crying, the interviewer consoled her, comforted her. You know what she told her that she didn't know? That the day prior to her interview with this accomplice, they found the bones of the girl that died as a result of her bringing the girl to this pervert. The woman breaks down crying as she realizes the severity of what had happened and what she had contributed to. And this interviewer, who was, again, really pissy and angry with the guy, she was nice and friendly and supportive and even sympathetic with the woman that killed this kid or helped kill her. Unfucking believable. There was another accomplice that she interviewed. They didn't spend a whole lot of time on her, probably because I don't know, she maybe didn't give good sound bites or something. But again, same softball questions, gentle tone of voice, no attacks or any kind of insults. And she gave the same air. She did the voiceover, so it was the same narrative. Uh, they were portraying her almost sympathetically. She, a woman who now wants to help the girls she once harmed. Really? They don't, you know, when Uncle Bob gets caught diddling little Jenny and goes to prison for like 10 years or 20 years, when he gets out, they don't generally let Uncle Bob talk to Jenny anymore. He doesn't get to help the girl he hurt, you know? But no. 60 Minutes Australia thought it was totally okay to portray this horrific human being as a noble soul who wanted to make amends. Fuck you people. Um, and another thing that annoyed me about the piece This might be an excuse me, an Australian thing. It might just be a common expression or term used in Australia. So if that's the case, then this is completely pointless and it's a dumb rant, but this whole thing is. She really loved the word confronting. Oh, this is a very confronting situation, isn't it? Oh, this material is very confronting and explicit. You should, viewer discretion advised, blah, blah, blah. Why do you like that word in particular? It's ridiculous. And it was obnoxious. Like she went on tours of the different abuse houses that the investigators had found, and they were touring with her, and she would ask them, standing in a crime scene, "This is all very confronting, isn't it?" She was digging, trying to get action shots of these investigators breaking down and crying because they're investigating child abuse, which is well known to be one of the hardest kinds of crime to investigate because of the psychological damage it does to investigators. That's real shit. I mean, you only, I think the average span or the average run for a criminal investigator. Now, of course, they continue their career elsewhere, but generally speaking, somebody who gets into investigating child abuse and sex trafficking, that kind of crap, they don't stay in that specialization for very long. The average, from what I understand, is between 2 to 3 years. And by the time you're done, you get to that mark, you're like, okay, I can't do this anymore. Because, yeah, you're exposed to the worst things that humans have ever done to other humans. Like abusing children is just beyond the pale. And so you can't take that forever. People need, I mean, therapy and like lifelong therapy, and psychology. It's a benefit. Like they give you lifetime uh, insurance just to cover the mental issues that you're going to have coming out of a 2 year stint of being an investigator for this kind of stuff. And so she goes around and talks to all these different criminal investigators about the case, and she just keeps prying. Like she got this one guy. I feel so bad for this dude. I mean, it was obvious that he was one of the lead investigators. He's barely holding back tears throughout most of his segments, or little appearances here and there, because I mean, dude, he had to watch that shit just to make sure he knew what to charge the guy with. And I'm not even about to try to find the stuff or watch it, but just hearing them describe at a very high level what was in that stuff, I don't know how he didn't just blow his brains out from seeing that. And she just keeps digging it up and digging into him. Well, I mean, how do you sleep at night? I'm like, what? And she even got him to admit that he had nightmares about this stuff. And he said, the one thing that really stood out, and I feel so bad for these investigators that finally nailed this asshole. That he finally said the day the nightmares stopped was the day that we arrested him. That was the first. I went home that night and I actually got a good night's sleep for the first time in a long time. And you're like, oh my God, this dude needs a hug. Just stand up and smack this idiot interviewing you, dude. That's just ridiculous. But she did that to several different people. And then she got some head honcho prosecutor in of the Philippines or in that district or whatever. She tried to get him to say that this one pervert makes all Australians look like criminals. And you could just tell the look on his face was like, what? And he even, I'm surprised they aired this part. He even looked at her funny and said, well, that's what you say. I, we're not saying that at all. And that whole again, that interview didn't go anywhere either because she was just so shitty at it and just trying to sensationalize every little bit of it. You don't have to do that. The concept is sensational. Just reporting the facts is enough to make mind-splittingly compelling television. Honestly, that's probably why To Catch a Predator was so successful. Because, yes, they dressed it up and Chris Hansen was very smug and smarmy when he did his shtick, but by and large, they really did just stick to the facts. And they showed the stings, they interviewed the idiots, and Hansen was a much better interviewer of the perverts that came under his microscope. And he actually got them to answer questions sometimes, but not this woman, my God. So, yeah, the whole thing was just so stupidly absurd. She is probably the worst interviewer I think I've ever seen. Geraldo Rivera does a better job. I think a talking head on CNN of all people, of all places, would do a better job interviewing the people that she did. This was just pathetic. And so, geez, been ranting for 35 minutes. Um, yeah, I was just astonished that this piece even made it to air. Um, and I have to say, I'm not going to give names because I don't see any. um, no, that's not entirely true. Who's the? Oh God, of course I've forgotten the guy's name. Uh, Jim can't. JCT criminal psychology or something like that. He does a bunch of analysis videos of different interrogations and crimes. The Stephen McDaniels case, he did a great video on him. And Scott Peterson, he did a good video on that creep. So that kind of thing. I really like how they present that stuff. So how sad is it that frickin' YouTubers are actually better at covering these stupid stories than the goddamn press, which is supposedly out there to do this? They have access to go interview these assholes, and they completely botch it. There are interviews from the 70s and 80s. They got, and they did it right. Like they got, who was it? I think they interviewed Jeffrey Dahmer a bunch. They've interviewed a bunch of classic serial killers, but they had psychologists do the interviews. Or at the very least, they brought in competent interviewers, like press people, to conduct these interviews, and they actually got some kind of insightful answers out of these serial killers and serial rapists and what have you. This was nothing. This was embarrassing. I mean, I just don't know how that passed muster. I guess that's the best they can do these days, and it's pathetic. Um, anyway, screw you, 60 Minutes, Australia. You're terrible. You should be ashamed of yourselves. And the same goes for your American counterparts. I know they're just as bad. So, yay, solidarity in suckage. So that's it for me. I'm tired of talking about this because the subject matter itself is offensive and disturbing to me. So, uh, I could never do the work they do. Oh, wait, that is the one last thing. I do have to begrudgingly give the nod to this dumb broad, the Tara Brown and the 60 Minutes Australia production crew. They did one thing right. And this is what distinguishes them from the American counterpart. The Australian guys, when they made this piece, they actually praised the local police that did the legwork in catching this son of a bitch. That's something you don't hear anymore in America. Our press absolutely hates our cops. And for, for obvious reasons. They're just rigged to hate police. I mean, they openly support defunding the police. So, yeah. So, begrudging thumbs up to the crew and to the interviewer for at least having the basic common decency to show some gratitude towards the people who actually saved these kids. Got to give them credit for when they do something right. You got to reward them, right? It happens so rarely. I almost forgot to do it. Anyway, that's going to do it for me. I have, I'll post a status update in a different video. I don't want to taint that material with this or this material with that. So, catch you guys later. Hope this was moderately informative. I'm not going to bother linking the videos that I'm ranting about because they don't deserve the views. Oh, that was the final detail. Comments are disabled on all the videos that they published. We wouldn't want that pesky public expressing their views on anything, now would we? Anyway, catch you guys next time, and comments on my videos are not disabled. Cheers.